All right, welcome back, guys. I am so excited today to introduce you to Jaclyn. Jaclyn, will you introduce yourself?
Sure, sure. I'm Jaclyn Paul. I probably am best known as the person behind the ADHD Homestead blog, and I also have a book, Order from Chaos: The Everyday Grind of Staying Organized with ADHD. And I'm kind of a lifelong writer, so I came into this world as someone who could sort of articulate their life experiences through writing, and I have chosen to focus my nonfiction work on adult ADHD and the experience of maintaining a home and professional life and social circle with all that. And I also write fiction and sort of weave in ADHD characters and themes in there as well. I do that under the pen name Lena George. So you might have seen around. I have promoting my book, She's Not Home, that was out last year. So that's
Oh,
that's another one. I'm kind of secretly writing another book, not secretly because I have a deadline, but I'm kind of writing another book behind the scenes at the moment. But that's me. I live in Baltimore, and I'm sometimes online talking about ADHD nowadays. I'm more offline and doing stuff like this and speaking at conferences and stuff because don't love the social media. But yeah,
me
sometimes you'll
neither.
still see me online posting ADHD content. More often, I'm talking about sports or food. So
I didn't know you had a pen name for your fiction. That's so interesting. But I just read um your book, and I'm gonna. Can you say the title again, please? Because people really need to read this.
it's Order from Chaos: The Everyday Grind of Staying Organized with Adult ADHD. And I'm
Yes.
very interested that you listen to the audiobook. And I always love to hear people's experiences of the audiobook because I'm a terrible listener, so I can't do audiobooks, but I'm glad there
Oh,
is an audio. But I always check
I
in with people like, oh, was it good? Was the narrator good? Was it? And
yeah, the
yeah.
narrator was fantastic, and I was going to ask you if you narrated it. So obviously you didn't. So that answers that question.
No, I didn't. I have narrated a lot of my most popular blog posts because I know that in the ADHD community, I'm a little bit of an anomaly, that books and reading are my hyper focus jam, but a lot of people really benefit from being able to listen. And so I I have recorded some of those and did on Patreon for a while have a little podcast, and I mean it's still there. So it
Oh,
I
good to
was
know.
doing narrations of popular blog posts and little discussions on that.
Okay, yes, I am a prolific reader for sure. And I love reading paper books, but I definitely love my audiobooks because I'm diagnosed hyperactive and I'm always on the go. And the other thing I loved about it is I listened to it in double speed. And when there was one point about like two-thirds through the book where you were getting like really specific about things, about like filing systems and things like that, where I'm like, okay, this is one and a half speed because I need to like slow down and like really get this. But I definitely want to listen to it again and implement a lot that was going on. And what I noticed in your book is it was very heavy on getting things done. Who's the author of Getting Things Done?
Oh, David Allen.
David Allen, which is a fantastic book. But when I read it, I was like, yeah, but I have ADHD. And this is all just a bit too much. And I feel like your book came in as like okay, if you like the idea of getting things done, here's how you actually get things done with ADHD. And that's very much, and I just, as I was going through everything you were saying, I was just like, yes, 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 get rid of things. Yes, absolutely. Make it easier for yourself. Also the filing the system was a little bit different than I'm very much interested in implementing the filing system, which was like if you have a button that needs to be sewn back on, put it in a file folder which is just something that like most people would never think about. And also, I think the calendaring, I put every stupid thing on my calendar. And I have my clients do that as well, or like if they're starting a morning routine, you mentioned like markers in the bathroom and like people leaving messages and writing things down and writing down ideas. And I have a client that I'm working with currently who was starting a morning routine. And I'm like, okay, what does this morning routine look like for you? What would be the best thing to do? What order would it be to do it in? And what she did was put it on a post-it and stuck it on her bathroom mirror. And she's like, my kids are going to make fun of me. And I'm like, who cares? Like,
I mean, even if they do, but I mean, for me, even if my kid does make fun of me, it modeling that troubleshooting process and the not caring if you're doing a thing that people might think is a little goofy is very important because
yeah,
I'm trying to teach him who cares if it's a little bit different? You got to do what works for you and not what you see all your friends doing, which is hard because he's in middle school. But
yeah, absolutely. I think my kids definitely grasped onto like we do our own thing. And sometimes it works as it sounds like yours is a little bit younger, but one of mine is like out of the house and one is 17 and the other's 15. And sometimes it works against me because it's like we don't care what people think of us. And it's like mom and dad don't, it doesn't matter what they think. And so it has become a problem.
there's a little bit of that backfire. And they're like, no, sometimes you actually do have to be mindful of how something looks. Like there are some there are some times where we have to stop and think, like, how is the other person gonna interpret this? And
Exactly, exactly. So just if you were to talk about the principles of your book, what would that look like?
so I think one concept that really undergirds it is self-knowledge and self-acceptance
Mm,
that I think a lot of us read a book like Getting Things Done and not a knock on the way it's written because I think when you write a strict self-help or prescriptive book like that, it you have to present it as something that's going to be this great solution, right? And look, even these busy CEOs, no matter how busy you are, no matter how much you have on your plate, this is going to work for you. And ooh, it might not. So, and that's the but I have ADHD part. And I what I wanted to get across is there are two kind of schools of thought I encounter a lot on the ADHD internet land. And one of those is that you are just expected to settle for less, I guess, like have a less satisfying life, or I can't do as much, or I can't use a calendar, or I can't stay organized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I really don't like. But then there's the counterpoint to that that I see a lot, especially more lately, that's like, no, you should be rejecting all of those expectations because that's unfair, ableist, or whatever. Like there's a middle ground and a nuance between that. And it I wanted to capture that it sometimes feels taboo to admit that you want a quote unquote normal life or to be able to do things, a normal or achieve certain things. Some of us, our goals in life require us to corral our ADHD a little bit. And
yeah.
if we even socially, if we want to show up as the kind of caring, reliable friend we believe that we are in our heart of hearts, then you need to be able to like check in on someone when they're going through a hard time or gets back to somebody and say, yes, I'm going to your New Year's party or whatever. It's just very basic things. And I wanted to talk about that stuff, the stuff that's kind of boring, but it makes up the fabric of our lives and how we see ourselves. And then also taking in all these information about these systems and then layering on our knowledge of ourselves and kind of tweaking the system to fit who we are. Because I think that as people with ADHD, it's more important than for anybody else to know ourselves and be able to modify stuff to suit, because we're not going to be
Yeah.
able to force the square peg into the round hole the way I think someone who this stuff comes more naturally to will be like, well, I don't, this maybe isn't the ideal system, but I'll use it because it's here or because it works. And that's difficult, if not impossible, for us. And so we really need to learn what works and why.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah.
It's funny because with the calendaring, you talked about like appointments and even like the important things in life, like if a friend had, someone pass, putting that in the calendar so that it comes back the next year. You mentioned like mom wanting to go for that hike, I think it was, and like putting that in the calendar so that you remember to invite. I was at a practice, I don't know, soccer practice, cheer practice for one of my kids, and I was standing next to another mom who I suspect has ADHD as well. And we were talking about like getting to, getting to these practices and getting to these appointments and things like that. And she's like, how do you remember it all? And I'm like, well, we have a shared calendar. And that was before I learned to manage my time the way I do now. In my coaching certification, they taught us this specific way to manage our time that I adapted for ADHD. It was very rigid as well. But and it's based on a Google Calendar, but at the time there was this thing called A plus calendar. And I could share it with my husband and I could share it with my oldest son. And if I am standing at the dentist office and they are like, when's your next cleaning? It's, can you do it in February? you know, whatever. Sometimes they're 6 months apart. And I pull out my phone and I put the appointment right in the calendar. And that's just how I did things for many, many years. And that saved me. And then also my husband in that A plus calendar, I don't even know if it's still a thing, but my husband would get the notification as well that these things were happening or be able to look at the calendar. Now he looks at my calendar and is like, oh, is she on a call? Is she with a client? And so
Yeah.
shared calendars. We also have a shared grocery list with Trello. And something you talk about a lot in the book is, I'm gonna get it wrong, I think. Is it to doodle?
Oh, toodle doo. Yeah,
Doodle do.
yeah, I've toyed with the idea of doing a second edition of the book for many reasons, but I also think about I do recommend specific apps in there that I may or may not use anymore. And I actually end up building my own after the book came out. And so I now use that. But it's, yeah, at the time, Toodle-Doo was the one that I thought was most adaptable to my way of thinking. Yeah, but I do include tons of examples of how to break things down in your to-do list by context, which is a big GTD thing, is sorting your to-do list by what can I do right now. So any to-do list app, no matter what I use, I have to be able to say, I'm at my computer, I'm connected to the internet. All right, so my list for like computer, online, and computer like don't need the internet. It's two separate lists. I can combine them and view them in one place, and it filters out all the other stuff like the errands and the grocery list and all that so that I'm not even seeing it because
And just to
yeah.
let people know what you mean by context is like where you're at.
Yeah, where you're at or the tools. So I have contexts in my to-do list for, the computer, the phone. I have separate ones for talking and texting or reading because sometimes I'll have to read an article or something for whatever and I'll put that in. Yeah, that's something you can do on your phone while you're in waiting for your kid to get their teeth cleaned at the dentist. And so
Mhm.
being able to pull it up, say like, all right, what's my like phone reading and texting? Like, oh, I haven't texted my mom in a week. Let me do that. And then, oh, there's this article I was supposed to read. Oh, let me do that. Um, yeah, so it filters it. I have contexts for people. So, or if you have a recurring, at my old job, I was on the management team, and we had this management team meeting I think it was every week. And I had a context for the management team meeting because you think of stuff, you're like, oh, I got to bring that up I could bring that up in this meeting. But how are you going to remember that? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so content, it's about the tools or the place. Running errands is another example of a context, sitting at the desk, stuff like that. Any way to break things down. So it's like, all right, I'm sitting at my desk. I have 30 minutes. What can I do?
I love
And
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I currently use Trello and I've used that for many years. But we use like a shared grocery list on Trello. So it used to be when my oldest was living at home, he had it, my husband had it, I had it, and we all could add things to the grocery list. And sometimes I'll be standing in the kitchen and I'm like, we need more cheese. Can you add that to the list? And he's already on his phone anyway, because I'm cooking. And so he'll pull up his phone and he'll add it to the list. I need to get the 15-year-old and the 17-year-old on there because they're like, can you pick this up or that up? And I'm like, when I get them
No.
on there, I'm just going to say, add it to the list. And it,
Yeah, I just say if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. And then you cannot just ask me something as I'm walking around the house. I will not remember. And
yeah,
yeah, I started that training very young because that's like there are times when I'm reliable and times when I'm not. And as I'm walking through the living room with a basket of laundry, if you're like, "Oh, hey, my pants don't fit. I need you to buy me new pants," that's going to be in one ear and out the other. But if you write me a note, I will get
yeah.
you new pants.
That working memory, right? And that's what I loved in the book too, because I keep a notebook in my console of my car. I love how you talked about your moleskin book that you decorate. I don't know if you do that anymore. But I have my clients work with what I call a distraction notepad, especially like my academics or the ones that are really trying to concentrate. I have them put a notepad next to them. And when you want to Google something or when you want to get up and go do something or whatever that urges to like get away from what you're doing, I have them write it down on their distraction notepad. And that very much sounded like your notebook.
Yeah, it's the ability to like just let it go. Because I think a lot of us have that fear, and it is very legitimate fear that if we don't do it right now, it's never gonna happen. And
Right.
and if it's something silly, I think it's easy also to tell ourselves it's not worth writing down. But it is if you can write it down and then not derail yourself from what you're supposed to do. I do still have every notebook as I switched brands because I needed thicker paper, but each notebook has different stickers on the front so that
Yeah.
yeah, and I do have a memory of like, oh, when did this thing happen? Because I'll often, speaking of memory, want to go back to my notes about a specific event and time and like, oh, I think that was the notebook that had the postcard with the spear on the front. Like it was that one. And I'll remember I'm not a visual person, but I have like names for the notebooks, like the spear notebook or the I've the Yosemite bum resource notebook. Like, it's a way of identifying things and helping to place your memories and your place yourself in time because it's
Yeah.
very challenging to not have that specific memory. And yeah, I've written everything down since pretty young age. So,
Yeah. I towards the end of the book you mentioned like reading about you suspecting that you have ADHD when you were 17. And I recognized, oh, we have a journaler here.
oh yeah, because I would never know that if I didn't have the journal pages that
Yeah.
showed my thought process. And I have these bulleted lists. And I don't know, I was somehow doing research on the internet to look these things up. At the time, that was not as easy as it is now. Um, but maybe the sources were all more official, who knows? Because now I think
Well,
people go, there's such a wealth of information that you can figure it. Because I think I should have been easier to identify. I don't think I was the prototypical like girl who went and diagnosed. but those who were, I think there's more out information out there for them. But there's also so much untrustworthy information on the
Yeah.
internet now. But that was my starting point though as well, even in the I guess it'd be the late 90s when I was doing my first forays and building my case. But it is interesting because it's if the figures of authority in your life, whether it's your doctor as an adult or parents and teachers as a kid, are not picking up on there's something here that's not right, then it's nice to have resources to turn to. And that's definitely what I did. And then I kind of got the ball rolling haltingly from there.
I have a lot of people come to me that are not diagnosed and kind of feel like they shouldn't be seeking help because they're not diagnosed. And I'm like, well, are you having these challenges? And I kind of go through the executive function skills. And it's funny when people um, come for a consult with me, they fill out a form. And basically, what I'm doing, I'm asking them questions that are telling me whether they're having challenges with these executive function skills. And whether you're diagnosed or not diagnosed, if you're having challenges with many of these executive function skills, it doesn't matter. You still have a problem like that we need to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think for me, because it's very hereditary, I had a sense when I was younger that there's a lot of struggles that you don't complain about because, well, that's just everybody struggles with that. And
Mm,
so why are you complaining? Because everybody else is working hard and doing okay. And I
yeah.
was able to sort of mask and mold into that. But I saw it happen with my sister, and she ran up against things. She's a lot younger, and I think she ran up against expectations academically that I was able to circumvent. Uh, it just being a kind of a different time. And she really started to struggle at one point, and family were talking to me about this and were saying, well, she's saying this and this, but everybody has that. You just got to do it anyway.
Mm,
Everybody has it. And I said, well, I thought maybe the reason you think everybody, because everybody, and there's a long family history of everybody having struggles and issues that are not in the middle of the bell curve. That
yeah.
it's it's not that we need to just suck it up and find a way to deal with. There are actually resources and tools that you can have to make it not such a struggle, and also to just realize there's only so much you can do. And I think that was something that as a kid I didn't run into as much. The pressure to like, if you've been labeled a smart kid, take all the AP classes.
Hmm.
That's something that I feel like kids feel now, that if you don't have over a 4.0 grade point average, you're lagging behind. And I just, I only took one AP subject, and that was English, because I was like, well, this seems like it means extra work, and I don't want to do extra work in those other classes. I just want to be able to coast along like I've been doing. And so I
Yeah.
was like, I'll do the extra work where I want it. And that's sort of a chronic underachiever approach, but in some ways, it's a mentality that can help you even later in life, that you have to pick and choose. You only have so much capacity. You can't do it all, and you have to pick and choose. Like
Mm,
what deserves my, extra effort here? Because
yeah.
it can't be everything where I have quote unquote potential, because you just can't. Just everyday life is harder, for at least for me, in a way that it just takes more energy at a baseline. And where do I want to put in the extra work?
Yeah. It's interesting because when I was in high school, my freshman year, I kind of bombed and because it was just different than middle school. And then I was like, okay, I understand the game we're playing here. And so I still, without opening a backpack when I got home, that backpack got dropped and it never got opened again. And I would do my work between classes
I did
and
that too.
I would not study for tests. I would just show up for the test and take the test. And there was this board in the counselor's office where basically the top, so many kids, I can't remember how many kids, with their GPA, right? So I had that one where I bombed in freshman year. And then I got on the board my sophomore year, with the top kids and stayed on the board throughout without like studying for a test, without opening the backpack. We had these little benches between because our school was set up where I'm in California, so there was an outdoor space between the buildings, and you didn't walk down hallways, you walked down these like courtyards basically. And so I'd be sitting there like doing my math homework to turn it in and just like you're saying, just kind of coasting along, but being able to make it happen and just but feeling like, wow, if I really actually applied myself, what could I do?
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about that. All of the ways that I was identified as having such a high aptitude and I just did not work to my potential at all, but I worked within where I knew I was in a safe zone and I tested well because I'm a very linguistic, linear thinker. And
Mm,
so I could BS my way through a test. I'd forget the material the next day. I wasn't great at retaining information, but I knew how to get a good grade on a test and I could do my homework like between classes. Um, I had scheduled study halls, which the overachievers, I realize now, like did not make sure they had a study hall on their schedule. But that was, my time to decompress and catch up on work because I also had a part-time job and, I did sports for fees. So, it, but it, it's interesting now because I'm like, oh, I was definitely doing that thing where if you're not sure, you're not going to go for it. And
yeah.
yeah, and always being comfortable in that place where you're the big fish in the small pond.
Mm,
And whenever I was faced with the moment where I could commit and risk being the small fish in the big pond and really test the limits of where I could go, I that's where what I didn't do. And
yeah.
there's my whole life trajectory might have been different, but it's I ended up in a good place, but it is an interesting thing to think about all that like homework, like doing your homework in the other classes. And
Actually studying for the tests and
I don't know how to study. I've still to this day never studied. I made it through all of like middle school, high school, and college without studying.
yeah, I
And
don't think I ever no, a few times I did because my oldest ended up going to the same high school that I went to. And I'm like, look, buddy, here's how it goes. You just show up and you work with your teachers and you'll do fine. And he did really, really well with that. And it's funny because I even got upset with him because he would calculate exactly how much work he had to do to get an A in that class. And he would not do the work he didn't have to do in order to he's like, why would I do it? I'm gonna get an A anyway. And I'm like, you should do the work. I remember as a parent being
yeah,
upset, but I did the same thing. And I feel like we're on this like thread of like underachieving here, but both being adults is very like having done things.
yeah,
Um, but speaking of doing things, I there was something towards the end of the book that I just grabbed a hold of, which was you are also a World of Warcraft person, and I was very much enveloped in that game for many years. It actually started with, we didn't talk about this before the call, but it actually started with Diablo. Do you remember that
oh,
game?
I do remember that game.
That's how we started was Diablo. And I remember we had one computer and my husband and I would take turns. Like you had your Diablo time and it's like, okay, buddy, your time's up. It's my turn to play Diablo. And then we got, more than one computer and moved on to World of Warcraft. But what you mentioned in the book was like giving that up in order to have other pursuits. And that's what I had to do too. And I calculated the amount of time that we were spending on the game because the game would tell you you've spent like this many hours. And I'm like, we are wasting our life away. And we have a child
Yeah.
who's big into gaming now. And
Yeah,
we
you
can't,
never realize how much time you had before you had kid until it's
yeah,
too late. So I'm like, what? I thought I was real pressed for time in my 20s. And like, what was I doing? What,
yeah.
like, how did I not realize how much time I had in the day?
But yes, I think that's an important message though. Like, what are you spending your time on? And I feel like for people now, a lot, it's their phone. It's, scrolling on the phone,
Absolutely.
checking notifications on the phone. And like my phone is sitting here next to me on silent, all notifications shut off because I have things I want to do. And I think it's important for people to realize like what is that thing that's like sucking up your time that you could let go of because in you talked about in World of Warcraft, like yeah, there's guilds, there's other people that you're responsible for. I think there was one guy in Massachusetts that was in our guild. There was a girl in Utah, and you start like getting to where you feel responsible to these people. And I
Yeah.
remember kind of getting in an argument with my husband, going, "We don't actually know these people. We."
Oh yeah, my guild, I mean, there were some people that I knew and I had met in person, and then there were some people I didn't know their real names. I only knew them by their main like player handle names.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But I was
yeah.
telling Jaclyn that I was feeling that pull. And even like I hear the 22-year-old and his friend talk about World of Warcraft, how it is now, and I'm like, oh, that sounds good.
Yeah. No, I there was something about it on the radio just recently and I was like, "Oh man, I don't know what's going on in there anymore." But yeah, and I don't want to like put down game because I think I was just talking to someone about this the other day that there's a big thing with nutritionists, dietitians online now on threads and stuff talking about this concept of no bad foods, that everything has its place. It's okay to eat cookies at Christmas. It's all part of it. You just have to think what proportion, if there's nutrients that I need, I don't want to be displacing all of those with the cookies, right? Because I
Yeah.
need to leave room in my life to like eat the things that are gonna allow me to and I am a pretty active person, I think. And so I think about that a lot in terms of getting what I need to be able to do what I want to do. But spending time, I think it's okay to zone out and scroll on your phone sometimes, just like it's okay to eat the cookies. But it's just like, yeah, if it's untold number of hours a day, and I just had to sit down with myself about an ad. I had to add Reddit to my list of, I have a grouping of apps that I'm like total 1 hour on the phone among all these apps, Threads, Instagram, and now Reddit. Because I was coming home from school pickup and I would sit on the couch and just be like scrolling, and then you look up and an hour has gone by, and I'm not like, oh, you should quit Reddit because you're wasting your time. But I'm like, oh, if I was to add up how much time, is that really what I want? No, I'm going to try to play the piano during that time after school when I don't want to be doing anything that's super intellectually demanding. But I am sad about like not having enough music in my life right now. And I said, well, use that time that you're scrolling on the couch between like 3 and 4 p.m. and do something you actually find sustaining. And but the
Mhm.
phone is such a thing. I have so many guardrails set up on it because I know that I can't myself just will it into submission. Like I have to actually set up hard limits where it'll lock me out of certain apps at certain times a day. And because
Didn't you
it's a lot.
didn't you mention something like that in the book on your computer that it will lock you out of certain things
Oh
after a certain
yeah.
time?
For
Do you
a
remember
while,
that?
I was using this browser extension called Productivity Owl, and it really is not for everyone because it would only allow you to spend a certain amount of time on a page, and then the owl would swoop in and close the tab.
I love
And
that.
yeah, obviously it doesn't work all the time because if you're doing research or this was the when I was using that was before everything was a web app. So a lot more work was happening offline or
Mm,
supposedly offline, but you can exempt certain websites from it as well and say, well, no, no, no. If I'm on Canva, like I can be there for as long as I need to be because I'm like designing my book ads or whatever.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I used that to just because you open up something to just read for a second and then all of a sudden it's 20 minutes later.
Hmm.
And it's again that self-knowledge and the acceptance that I'm not going to start noticing that time go by on my own. But
Yeah.
there are technology tools that you can get that will notice for you and get you back on track.
Oh,
Um,
and you talked about, speaking of time awareness, you talked about the time timer. And I always like to show people
oh
my
yeah.
mine. And you can't get this anymore, unfortunately. But I love that it has like basically like the time timer and the analog clock on there. It was kind of, well, analog clocks for kids these days, not that many kids are listening to this, but it was funny because my son was homeschooled for until like middle school. And he went to school and he's like, Mom, kids can't tell the time. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, they ask me what time it is. They can't read the clock.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah, we
And
have
so,
so many analog clocks in our house. It's probably more than the average. Because my husband actually finds them easier to read than a digital clock, which
yeah.
is like a real visual thinker thing. I'm like, what? Why wouldn't you want something you can read left to right? But so we have like our wall clocks and stuff are all analog. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
we do too. We do too. Yeah, that was funny. I guess they just stopped teaching that, and especially in the state of California, they're so heavy on testing that the teachers are frustrated that they have to teach to the test, and
Yeah.
that that analog clock stuff is just not on the test.
Well, I just read an article recently about how like top tier, like Ivy League level universities are having freshmen come in who don't know how to read a whole book anymore
What?
because the level of teaching to the test that happens that students are being given excerpts to read because you have that's the way the test is you have an excerpt and then you have to demonstrate your ability to parse that text. But there are a lot of high school students apparently who, unless they are doing it on their own during their like free time for pleasure, they're not reading full books. And so, like, the literature survey courses are having to cut down the number of books they read in a semester because reading a book every week or two is like overwhelming because they don't
Oh,
know how to
that
do it.
sounds
Yeah, no,
tragic
I
to
hate,
me.
I've been on the anti-standardized testing train since I was taking standardized tests in high school. And they told us for the math one, they were like, the Japanese are outscoring us. Like, you guys need to do better than, whatever bar they
Mm.
were setting because
I
like
remember,
we were behind. I have no idea why it was so important for us to like catch up to the Japanese, but that's the way it was put to us. And then the tests were so, I don't know. I just remember for the essay portion of the English one, writing something that just I was intending to make a mockery of the test, but mechanically it was sound. And so my parents were like, oh, good job. You scored, in the top 1%. And I was like, yeah. I wrote an essay about how I threw a plate at my friend like a frisbee at lunch, and we all got held back because we weren't allowed to go to class until someone confessed to throwing the frisbee, the plate.
just nonsense, right?
Yeah, it
When
was
I
like the most inane story possible, but it like checked all the boxes. So,
I remember doing the testing and like paying attention for like the first like one third of the test, and then at that point just bubbling stuff in, and I was over it. Giving an ADHD kid a standardized test is the worst. idea. I mean,
Yeah.
there's, and
Well,
then
because
like,
you know that it's stupid while you're doing it, and that's so hard to like get the best out of the ADHD kids when it's like even the teachers are saying we hate these and we think they're kind of
Mhm.
pointless, but like yeah, by all means, spend an entire week doing like extremely tedious like bubble filling on the test.
And then knowing you're going to turn that over and there's going to be more damn bubbles on the other
Yeah.
side.
No, they do ones on the computer now, like assessments, and I looked at a report of the not the statewide testing, but just the school's assessment for my kid last year, and I was like, ugh, I see exactly what happened here. This test is showing me one metric and one only, and that is how equipped he felt that day to engage with like a computerized assessment test.
Mm,
Because he would
yeah.
score, really high one time, and then the next time they assessed the same stuff, it would be like really low, and then it'd be really like, and the next time, I'm like, he didn't just forget like what geometry was for this
Mm.
one test. It's just he wasn't feeling doing a test that day. And, it's like, I told him, I was like, you've got to do it. But like, what are we
That's
assessing here?
for those of you with ADHD kids, I there was one point where we were working with, I don't know, I don't remember what they call it, but it's basically kind of an independent school. And we were kind of doing homeschool with this independent school that was out of town. And so we drive out of town and my ADHDer was probably like 6, 7 years old at the time. I don't remember exactly, but knew the material. Then this teacher would come meet with us and would test on this material, and the child would not know any of the material at all. And then would come home and know the material again. And I'm like, no, really, really, they know. They like,
It's
but
so frustrating.
yeah.
Because I know it because I've experienced it. If you ask me on the spot to like verbally regurgitate knowledge, I'll be like, I don't know. But then an hour later, I could write you a whole one-page essay about it, demonstrating my understanding. It's just the the on-the-spot testing is just sometimes completely unrepresentative of what a kid can actually do and what they know.
Well, and worse than that, they decided to do this in a Starbucks where there's all the clattering and the sound and the people coming and going. And so the child was totally distracted. I mean, I sit in a
It's
restaurant.
overwhelming.
Yeah, I sit in a restaurant with my husband and I'm hearing everybody's conversations around me and having one with him. And I mean, I'm not entirely engaged in any of it, but yeah, it's all coming at you. Like it's not a lack of attention, it's too much attention spent all the places.
Well, yeah, and being able to direct that attention. And that's the frustrating thing when people say things like, well, you can focus just fine on this thing. And it's like, yeah, but that too is not a choice. It's you're we're not choosing to deprioritize the thing that we're struggling to focus on.
Exactly. Well, you mentioned like to doodle or like wanting to do like a revamp of your book because of the tools. What tools currently are you using?
Let's see. In my current arsenal, I've done bullet journal for many years. I think I talk about that in the book
You
too.
do, yes.
That it, I mean, I've kept a notebook of some kind since I was in seventh grade, but bullet journal really helped me with a structure for the everyday and not just when I feel like I need to process something through longhand writing. Um, and it does help me to go back and see like what the heck happened in in my life and what I might have thought about it.
What I love that
And
you
yeah,
mentioned about bullet journaling, which I've actually found through I moved my planner, but I use a tool planner and TUL. But what you mentioned with bullet journal is like you can just leave out what doesn't work for you. Whereas
oh
with some
yeah.
planners, I have a stack of planners behind me because I plan to make an ADHD planner. And what I like about Tool is I can open it up and the pages go in and out really easily. And so I can just go, no, I can buy a regular planner and go, nope, not ever going to use that.
Yeah,
Throw that away. And I can add in things that I'm going to use. And you were talking the same way about the bullet journal, where it's like
absolutely.
you can use and it gets rid of that guilt, is what you were
Yeah.
talking about.
When also just ignoring, if you look on Pinterest or Instagram at bullet journals, just like ignore all that. Unless you're a super artistic person and that's what you want to do. But the guy who first came up with the bullet journal as a concept, Ryder Carroll, if you read his original book about it, it's so minimalist. It doesn't look like artwork. It's very bare bones, and he came up with it as a way to deal with his own ADHD.
I
And
thought I
yeah,
remembered he had ADHD. That's
yeah.
right.
And then people took off with it as like a visual medium, and there are bullet journal spreads on the internet that look like works of art, and it just is an impossible standard for most people that unless you think that's really fun. But I sometimes, even if I want to hand letter a heading somewhere, I'll just like write it in pencil first, and then if I have time and need to fidget and doodle during a meeting or something, I will go back and do it. But most times I don't. And so there are just these like, pencil things, placeholders and whatever. But yeah, so the bullet journal is a big tool that I use for staying organized. I'm big on email still. I feel like that feels less and less common now that people have gravitated toward texts or Slack or whatever. But I love the ability to drag emails into folders and I have my like waiting on folder in my email that I look at ideally once a week on Monday. Just, okay, where's stuff that's like something is there some sort of loose end that I need to follow up if I don't hear back from this person? And Slack and text, the thread just moves on. Um, so I'm still a big email person. We do use Google Calendar. Um, and I have separate Google calendars for work stuff, for personal stuff. There's a shared family calendar. My kid has a calendar. My husband has a calendar. So it's like growing up, we had that in a dry erase form in the kitchen. And my mom gave each of us like a different color dry erase marker. And we put our stuff on the month calendar that way. And we use Google Calendar that way now
Yeah.
as a family. So yeah, I definitely use Google Calendar heavily only for things that have to go on the calendar. Um, I don't do that time blocking thing because my brain knows that it's made up and I just don't follow it. Um, if I have like this meeting, like this call I had on my calendar and I know it's going to happen 11:30, so I need to sit down and be ready. But if I put 11:30 to 1:30, work on writing new book, like subconsciously, I absolutely know that there's no accountability for that. There's no reason for it to be at that time, except so in that case, I set, daily habit goals of, get out that writing. So
Yeah.
whenever I have time, I will get it out. And then um, I do have my to-do list app that I keep all of the to-dos that are not um, calendar specific, like, you know, picking up kids from sports practice is on the calendar, but going to the
Yeah.
grocery store, not. Yeah, so then I have all of my to-do list stuff in my app. So
And I'll
um
even write to-dos as far as like if I'm watching a YouTube video or listening to a book and something interesting
mhm.
is talked about, I'll even write check out such and
Yes,
such
I do that
and
all the
put that
time.
on there.
Yeah. And it just, I mean, and it'll be like at the bottom of the list for even I was out with a friend and he said, "Oh, you should listen to this song. It's really funny." And I put it in my to-do list app and it might have been a year later I finally listened to the song and then I texted
Yeah.
him. I said, "Hey, I finally listened to the song." Because it's not urgent, but it's like fun to do eventually. Yeah, I use my
Exactly.
notes app a ton as well and my like even voice memos. Like if I'm
Mm,
driving in the car and I'm like have some sort of thought that I want to record, I can just record a voice memo of myself talking to my
I would
phone in
text
the car.
if I was, yeah, if I was out for a walk or in my car, I would text myself a voice memo. And I found I never went back to it. And so what I want to do is kind of rely a little more heavily on Otter. I think they're calling it Otter AI now because they're calling everything AI. But it used to just be called Otter, and it will transcribe your voice note. And
Oh,
I
interesting.
I think you can even like go back and search and things like that. I need to start using it so I can share more about it. But that is a big thing with clients where they're like, what do I do with all my thoughts when I'm out and about? And I often recommend Otter as for that because I found with texting myself the voice note, I never would look back at it.
Yeah, it depends for me. If it's just completely random, I don't go into my voice notes app as it's not an inbox to me. So for me to find the voice note later, it really has to be part of a project. I have a nonfiction project I've been toying with for years about an abandoned hotel, and I have a whole folder of voice notes from that of me actually visiting it and dictating my immediate thoughts and observations as I'm there. And that I will 100% like go back to and use. But yeah, if it's just something very random, it often gets lost in the thing. But my notes app is it is a big junk drawer. I but that's a better one because the at least in the Apple one, it's the most recent notes kind of are toward the top. And so when I open it again, I'll see, oh, I did that. And then I'll try to transfer it out to a better place. But also having a to-do list app that's easy to pull up and put something in. Because if your thought is actually, oh, I'd like to read about this or do this or, look up this podcast and subscribe to it, that's stuff that you can put in as a to-do in your app instead of just like texting yourself or writing it in the notes app. I really try to capture as much as I can in there because that's where I go when I'm like, oh, what do I need to do right now? And
Yeah, it's an action, some sort of action. It really should go in the to do. If
yeah,
it's an idea, then I'm going to start using the Otter AI for that because sometimes I just have ideas for this channel.
yeah,
This goes up on YouTube and the podcast. And I just have ideas that I feel like I need to share with people. That's not a to do. That's maybe it's a put, you know, because I have a list of ideas for things that would go on here, but that would be an action, like put this idea on that list. But I think more and more with AI, we're going to have like the transcription and the search and the things like that. But also at the same time, you guys have a million ideas, those of you listening. And Jaclyn and I, we have a million ideas. And what I really like working with people on is just trusting yourself that if that's important, it will come back. And that
someday.
just, yeah, it just takes away such like all the anxiety and stuff like that of that great idea you had in the middle of the night or when you were out for a run or whatever. But I want you have a thought. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, even if it doesn't come back explicitly, for me as a fiction writer, I spend a lot of time when I'm out on walks and whatever, kind of thinking about characters, and something will come to me about a character and something that they're processing or going through. And that's something I do get that anxiety about letting it slip away.
Mm.
And I will try to record it, but I do think in that case, even if I don't get it down on paper, it's like getting to know a person that if you go out to lunch with a friend once a month, you're not going to remember the whole contents of every conversation you have at those lunches, but they will contribute to your overall understanding of them as a person and knowledge of them as a person and
Yeah.
ability to anticipate what you think they would do in a given situation. And I think that's true in a lot of areas of life. And so for me, I'm like, even if I forget the like very specific how I worded something when I was out on my walk, it's like having a conversation with a person that my whole processing of that project is informed by all of the thinking that I do, even if I don't remember it word for word. And I think that's if we don't want to mourn the ideas that don't come back too much because they might be informing future ideas in a way that we
Yeah.
don't even realize. But
Yeah, that
it's
makes me
yeah.
yeah, it makes me think sometimes I'm having conversations with my husband and we're talking about some concept and he's like, well, what is that? And I'll say, look, I could be making this up, but here's my understanding of this concept. And usually I'm right. But I always kind of like preface it with that because I'm not I don't want to say that this is absolutely true. But like when you talk about gathering and understanding of something, I do that very, very well because most of the time it is true. Like,
Yeah. No, I get that too. And I'm like, I don't know why I know this or where I learned it, but I just feel like I know. And
exactly.
even doing the crossword or something and just be like, how did you get that one? I said, I don't know. It came to me. Just, I can't tell you how I knew to guess that.
Yeah.
But
It's funny because there was something that happened and there's this sound that was made and I'm like, that sounds like this it's some Australian, I don't even remember what animal it was now, but some Australian animal. And my husband looks at me and he's like, how on earth would you even know what that sounds like? And I pulled it up on my phone and I pressed play and it was exactly the same. I said, I don't know. I don't know, but I retain information that means nothing.
well, and if someone asked you to recall it on the spot,
I
you
can't
might
tell
be
you
like,
now what
I don't
that
know.
animal was. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, I want people to be able to find you. Where would you like to direct them?
So I'll do the easy to spell one first. That I still do have, I don't add new content all the time to it anymore, but I still do maintain the ADHD Homestead, which is just at ADHDhomestead.net. And then I have my quote unquote personal website that's just about me and not about ADHD. That's at jaclynpaul.com.
Is that
And
where we would find your fiction?
yes,
Because
yeah.
I'm very, very interested in that.
Yeah, so there, and you can also go to lenageorgeauthor.com, but they both go to the same place. But yeah, there's a section for my books. And yeah, I'm also on Instagram as Lena George Author and Jaclyn Paul Writer. Um, and then Lena George Author on Threads. Yeah, I do have Facebook that's like connected to those as well, but those are the places I kind of hang out when I do hang out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing your brain with us. It was a fun conversation. I very much enjoyed your book. I'm going to go back through and get some implementation going with some of those things. The files, especially. I
Oh, the
loved
files.
the individual files. I have a vertical as far as it wasn't that in getting things done, I believe. I have my vertical file right here, but if you were to ask me to find specific information in this vertical file, it's not as specific as your book lays out. And so I want to really do some implementation in a few different ways with your book. And I appreciate you writing it. It's such a help to ADHDers. If you read Getting Things Done is wonderful, read it for sure. But
Yes,
if you
absolutely.
read it and you're like, ooh, that seems like a lot, this is Jaclyn's book is the way to like, gosh, it's like a cushion to getting things done. I feel like it's like, okay, if that seems like a lot, this is how it's actually done. So I'd very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that. It's at this point it's kind of a wise old book. It's been around a little bit, so I really appreciate that people are still finding it
Yeah.
and getting something out of it. So,
Well, thank you for coming and talking to us today. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. This is fun.